Many times in the past, I've said that Persona 3 is a 7 out of 10 game with an ending that is 100 out of 10, elevating it to one of the most memorable video games of my life. Of course, that was never to say that you can just pop the ending cutscenes on YouTube and get the full experience. It's how it fits with the previous tens of hours of gameplay and choices you made in it, turning the whole thing into something truly spectacular. And I feel like being a part of that as a player is crucial, so no adaptation to another medium could quite capture the same magic, even if it was pretty good by its own merits. But those rough edges, not to mention the game being stuck on the PlayStation 2 and or PSP, made it a bit difficult to bring it up in conversation and recommend to people in the same manner as everything else I'm perfectly normal about. But now it's 2024 and we have P3 Reload, including a PC release. So there were 3 questions I had going into it. Is the base experience lifted up with some quality of life stuff? Does the experience stack up to the idealized memory of it I formed 14 goddamn years ago? And did they dare to change even a single strand of the protagonist's hair in the ending? First, some historical context, because Reload is in a pretty interesting position when it comes to its release. Imagine, if you will, a Japanese role-playing game where Stephen Hawking streamlines all occult practices into a phone app and you use it to catch all of Earth's mythological beings like their Pokemon, and then punch Yahweh in the face in the sequel as even his own angels had enough of his shit. That's Shin Megami Tensei, the flagship series of Atlus. Now, imagine a dev meeting where they try to give that series a new spin, and as everyone ponders their hardest while looking at a blank whiteboard, someone kicks open the door, straddles to the coffee table in the middle of the room, and slams 2 books on top of it. Psychology of the Unconscious by Carl Jung, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders by Hirohito Araki. And thus, Persona was born. In less facetious terms, this has always been the character-focused spin-off. Rather than deal with gods, the apocalypse, and wondering if maybe Lucifer has a point, it was a series of games focusing on the internal struggles, the facade we put on to protect ourselves from the world being given a material form, and how it would be fucked up if the collective unconscious of humanity had the power to bring Hitler back to life. Persona 1 and the 2 duology still had staples of SMT design like back-to-back dungeon crawling with little breathing room, fighting demons and negotiating with them. And then Persona 3, the first entry of the series for a new generation of hardware in the form of the PS2, just reinvented all of that. All enemies were now Jungian shadows of the human psyche, manifestations of what we want to keep hidden from the public eye. A calendar system was introduced, intermixing the dungeon crawling with daily life in which you socialize with people, while also putting a tangible sense of time passing to the events of the game. These things were later rolled into Persona 4 and 5, and these became the Persona formula in a way. P3 is basically P1 as far as the series' mechanical identity is concerned. But at the same time, Reload is out now, years after these 2 incredibly successful iterations of those ideas, so how can the experimental prototype compare to them after all this time? Well, let me put it this way. When Persona 4 Golden and Persona 5 Royal, beefed up versions of the games I enjoyed quite a lot, showed up on PC, my reaction was, oh cool, and thinking I would get them someday when I feel like experiencing these games again. When P3 Reload was announced for PC, I hooted, I hollered, and I got it on release despite Atlus being skinflints and overpricing it to hell. I think that emotional response is worth examining here. Let's get to the game itself. It's a story as old as time itself. A fictional nowhere city that is big enough to have a cool monorail, but small enough to have pretty much all of its economy in the pocket of a single family. A supernatural threat rearing up its head in the night, adding an extra hour to the clock, during which the dark parts of the human psyche roam the streets, giving people catatonic depression, and anyone not in tune with the phenomenon gets turned into a coffin. A transfer student that gets entangled in all of this and joins a team of teenagers dealing with this shit, going to school by daylight and fighting evil by moonlight. By mimicking the act of shooting themselves in the head because nothing summons a stunt quite like thinking about your own death. Gameplay-wise, it's split into 2 halves in a way. One of them is a classical JRPG, where you run through a procedurally generated tower dungeon called Tartarus, grab treasure chests and slap enemies around. There are 2 elements that keep the tempo of that part of the game going. First, hitting an enemy's weakness knocks them over and gives you an extra action, and if you manage to do that to all opponents, you get to have your whole team jump them and beat their ass. The reverse can also happen. Not the Arby's parking lot experience part, but if an enemy hits a weakness of one of your characters, they also get to act again. So it's advisable to get the drop on them and not even give them a chance to do anything. The part balancing it is the fact that only a few of these possible weaknesses are tied to physical attacks, and most of them are linked to elemental magic, and boy oh boy are items recovering your mana pool scarce. So you need to keep it at the back of your head constantly as you climb onto higher and higher floors with a mini-boss guaranteed every now and then. So sometimes you need to rely on physical attacks, the more powerful ones even costing HP to not make it too simple, and hope that they score a crit and give you a bonus action. At some point in the endgame I had Yukari, my fastest team member, stacked up with crit boosting stuff so that she just shot everyone and I never learned anyone's weakness again. And let me tell you, I felt like a tactical genius. In general, the pace of dispatching regular encounters is nice and fast, especially now with the power of SSD, and the boss fights can give you a bit of a head scratcher. And if anything is too hard or easy, there is always the possibility to change the difficulty at any moment unless you opt into the highest one at the start, which is nice. The thematic mechanical spin on the usual JRPG formula are the titular personas, which are basically your JoJo stands. Every party member is locked into having just one, whereas the protagonist can swap, affecting his stats, vulnerabilities and available abilities. And just like in Shin Megami Tensei, they are based on the kitchen sink of real-life mythologies and you unlock more of them by slapping them together. The Egyptian god Horus plus the Hindu goddess Lakshmi equals motherfucking Satan. So the name of the game is working around your team composition by assuming a role that would best fill out any gaps. Also, if the protagonist dies, it's an instant game over, so do prioritize his health and safety over everyone else. In SMT, it was because all the fuck-ass demons you made a pact with cheer at the fact their boss is now dead. In here, it's for reasons. Point being, don't get ambushed by enemies, idiot, and don't forget items exist to be used. And so do skills that do something else than inflict or heal damage, especially the buffs and debuffs. The other half of gameplay is a simulation of the daily life of a Japanese high school student. Go to class, make friends, try to better yourself, get a part-time job. Watch as each of these activities lead to unlocking even more options, like a little cobweb. The twist being that all the social connections you make are themed after the major arcana of a tarot deck, same as the personas. Getting to know a guy representing a chariot arcana better gives you a bigger XP boost when you fuse a persona of that suit, which in turn you can equip when you hang out with him to make forging that connection a little bit easier. It's a steady loop of one half of the game helping you in the other. Not to mention stuff like part-time work can fund your purchases for dungeon delving equipment. It sets up a nice pace of hardcore shadow slapping broken up by slice of life shenanigans, and the in-game days just fly by, and then the plot develops further and more of the dungeon is unlocked. It's a winning formula, and it's no wonder it became what later Persona games are known for. As a side note, I find it really funny that the regular topics in school get a few sentences, but whenever Mr. Edogawa, the school nurse, substitutes a teacher and starts yapping about real-world magical practices, he gets several paragraphs of text. Gee, I wonder what topic the game devs found the most interesting. He even talks about the No, not this time. The mystical tradition that is the name of the game this time is divination using the tarot deck, with the protagonist symbolizing the full arcana. Numbered 0, nothing at all, but infinite impossibilities. Which was a first for the series as well. The previous protagonists were assigned to Emperor, Sun and Moon respectively, because this time you're really playing as someone with nothing that has the potential to define himself in any way. Some would argue that this makes him into a blank slate, but I disagree, for reasons that I will get into in the spoiler section. It's also why I think that the P4 and P5 products being associated with the full as well is not a great fit, but that's neither here nor there. The social links focus on building relationships with people in a gamified context. Some of them advance automatically with the main plot, but the majority of them are linked to player choice on how to spend their in-game time. They all go from rank 1 and max out at 10, but sometimes you just need to hang out with someone with no further development because they didn't vibe with you the previous time or something. This is both a blessing and a curse, and all the hangups I have with playing Persona 3 all those years ago still apply. On one hand, it's nice to have a quantifiable way of how far along a sub-story is. On the other hand, some of them are stretched way too thin in text and nuance to fit 10 meetings, and the fact that the ranks only advance if you meet up with the character at their usual standing spot is weird. Like, I live together with Mitsuru under one roof. Do we really need to grab a burger after school and not during the winter vacation? I get that programming to account for the scenes that happen at school is a lot of lines of code, but come on. One other form of artifice, the fact that advancing any S-link with a female character means romance, has thankfully been done away with, and you can hang out with women without being a manslut, even if you're still gonna disappoint some of them. Though it still feels weird that once you max out a relationship, you just never talk to these people again, because the mechanical incentive directs you elsewhere now. It definitely feels like the Octopath Traveler situation where you were supposed to just pick favorites and disregard the rest, and boy oh boy is that not something anyone is going to do at all. The interesting thing about the social links is that, especially compared to later entries in the series, they sure do start rough. It's very apparent that the theme of it's hard to understand other people and forming lasting connections is very tough actually, was at the back of the head of the writers at all times. Because while they all go on their own arcs through their stories and come out the other end as better people, your choices of companionship include such colorful characters as Dude trying to bang a teacher, Narc, literally a child, and everyone's favorite, Dude who scammed you out of $400. Anata no terebi ni jikane to Tanaka. This song has been haunting me for years. I don't think it's much of a spoiler to mention the general structure of the main plot being tied to the calendar mechanic, but I think it's really nice how it feels organic in P3 in a way that is not really replicated in the later entries. In Persona 5, the team feels pretty passive due to their shtick being just, I don't know, I guess we'll wait for a horrible person to inevitably become part of our lives, and then working on that. In P3, the major story events are tied to the phases of the moon and... well, what the fuck are we gonna do? It's the moon. Go prepare for your exams and make sure you are ready for the inevitable. Presentation-wise, Reload is a beast. But before I heap praise onto it, I need to say I feel like the PC port was an afterthought. The key bindings don't account for mouse at all, even if it actually does stuff and you can pretty much reliably do most things in the game with just it and WSAD keys. The saving message mentions not turning your console off, and the game just uses the default Windows cursor and it looks terrible. And before any of your smartasses say, oh, why didn't you plug in a controller? This game is 90% picking things from menu. Of course I'd want to use a mouse. One last gripe I have is that I feel like I had to bring the brightness down 2 notches from the default, but I don't know if that's my screen or the game. Those gripes aside, P3 Reload looks and sounds excellent. Base game already oozed charm back in the day, and this remake just kicks it up to 11. The UI is absurdly intricate and clean, the team members get unique hype shots when they land a critical hit, some splash arts are added to a few scenes, everyone gets a unique screen for when they finish a fight with an all-out attack, and they all say mass distraction in the background, which is the name of the iconic normal battle theme. The character animations are full of personality, the music is still full of bangers, and whenever you get into a fight, you get greeted by It's honestly the best possible outcome when it comes to the idea of applying the hugely successful UI design from Persona 5 back to P3, and keeps the very strong audio-visual identity of the original game intact, just giving it more oomph. Less of a new coat of paint, more of a higher resolution recording. As for the other changes made between P3 and Reload, well, let's tackle them now. Please note I only played Persona 3 FES before Reload, so I have no knowledge nor opinion on whether or not something was already present in P3 Portable. Also, I played FES with an undapped patch on an emulator, like a massive weeb, and I played Reload with Japanese voices on, like an even bigger weeb, so I have nothing to say about the change in voice cast. You want an opinion on those? Ask someone that doesn't play Mahjong in his spare time. Every character gets a super attack named Feruji, and everyone's conditions to fill up the meter are a little different. Junpei wants to feel like a big hero, so he gets it for scoring critical hits. Mitsuri is used to being on top of the pecking order and charges up by inflicting status effects, and so on. It can honestly kinda steamroll some fights if you keep it around to alpha strike a miniboss or something, especially as they ignore elemental resistances and deal at least raw basic damage. The fact that getting up after having a weakness hit no longer wastes a full turn is massive. And fights are no longer laughably one-sided thanks to that, but it's definitely not enough to offset just how much Terror G can turn the tide. Here lie all the mini-bosses who previously gave me trouble, they never scored a hit. Tartarus was always a bit of a drag due to its procedural nature and sheer length, and they varied it up with different blocks of it being more visually distinct, the leitmotif changing a bit, the room shape becoming more distinct. And frankly, that combined with the faster pace of the combat in general, and the fact that shuffle time just lets you pick a card rather than track the one you want for several seconds, just made it altogether more enjoyable. And the party members exchange some banter while running around, though sadly it's incredibly easy to cut it off by accident as someone starts talking a nanosecond before you start a fight or something. It's still procedural slop with no level design, but I considered Persona 4 getting themes for it a major upgrade, so it gets a pass. I guess I'm just easy to please. The big change, and probably the most contested one, is the fact that you fully control your party members by default. In basic P3 they were run by AI and you could give them general orders on how to behave, but that's it. I think the unwieldiness of the system is largely overblown and it was fine, and it is both an extension of the aforementioned theme of communication is hard actually, and something that generally puts you into a role of a team leader rather than an omnipotent force controlling everyone's moves. But at the same time, you know, actually being fully involved for more than 1/4 of your team's turn is way more engaging as a gameplay loop. I'm kinda fine keeping it as is, even if I have the chance to go back to the automated orders. What does raise my eyebrows is the feature to rewind up to 2 days back at any point. I don't know how much ground I have to complain about this, considering I used it a bunch after realizing I wasn't recording and wanted to actually have video footage of some scene. Still, opening with "here's a contract that you will take responsibility for your choices, sign it," and then going "oh, unless you want to roll it back, no worries homie," is, in its most charitable interpretation, weird and unfitting. What does fit perfectly is the voluntary time you can spend with your teammates. P3 ties the character development of the main cast to the progression of the main story, and this is generally a good thing. They are still active and involved throughout the entire game, which in turn keeps the pacing of the plot really solid. But only the girls had social links in which you explore their less supernatural problems, and it could feel a bit bizarre how you only got to spend quality time with the people you literally live with on predetermined dates and in post-combat banter. But now you can spend time with everyone, doing stuff like tending to a roof garden, cooking together or watching some TV. You can even watch a documentary with the party dog to hear what a real one has to say. It enhances the feeling of having a bunch of roommates greatly, and it definitely doesn't hurt that these small scenes also give these characters additional passives in combat. And the dudes even get their own side stories, where you can share a heart-to-heart with them without the constraints of the social link system. Man, I honestly would love for the next entry in the series to do away with SLs and just do that for every character. It feels much more organic. What else? Oh, the outfit changing the character's appearance in Tartarus are now separate from the actual armor items, so you don't need to worry about using suboptimal numbers by refusing to use the ugly as sin Battle Panties armor sets. You can make the superior aesthetic choice of putting everyone in tuxedos and maid costumes. Alright, anything else I want to gush about is going to be delving into spoilers, so if you want to avoid them and just get to the criticisms, go to the timestamp visible on the screen now. Though, I guess you'll reach that timestamp even if you don't skip the spoilers. Funny how time works. Anyway, see you all there, whether you take the long or the short road. Unless you click off the video now to make me feel stupid. More like stupidoido from One Brain Cell Essays. Let's have a party, there's a full moon in the sky, it's the hour of the Knicks and I don't wanna die. I won't be breaking any new ground by saying the other major theme in this story is that of death. I still didn't want to risk it in the spoiler-free section, as I think this can be easy to forget when you're in the middle of this simulated life. But between the main thread being called Tartarus, the fact you're told about how limited everyone's time is at the very start of the game, the first persona you ever get being Orpheus, a man who almost got his wife Eurydice back from the underworld if not for a moment of doubt, and the fact that the original P3 intro slaps you in the face with Memento Mori a couple times, yeah, the game isn't exactly subtle about it. This is the exact reason why this game, for the first time in the series history, included the time management mechanic. The time is always ticking, and the only thing you can do against the inevitable end is face it head on. And you face so many other inescapable things on your way there in the form of the boss fights, which are all associated with the meaning of the first 12 major arcana in reverse, and prevailing against them symbolizes turning the card upright. The Magician is the first real fight in the game, and the card in reverse symbolizes poor planning and untapped potential, which is fitting given that Akihiko lures it to the dorm when escaping, and it's when you first get to tap into that stunned summoning potential. The next fight, High Priestess, in reverse means withdrawal, silence and not being in touch with your intuition, which is why Junpei runs ahead without discussing it with the team and makes the situation worse. And after the fight, you stop the train by a lucky guess of which lever is the brake. And so on and so forth. It's not always a perfect fit. I, in particular, don't know what going to a love hotel would have to do with a reverse Hierophant, but it's really cool seeing these battles in a new context once you have that knowledge and are going through the game again. And of course the journey can end in only one way, overpowering death for long enough to matter before it takes hold. I think it's particularly smart of the game to not just have the protagonist die, but to first lay the groundwork of showing how this will impact everyone you bonded with. Shinjiro is a cool physical party member, he saves your ass a few times and he just gets shot fucking dead. It impacts the entire party for the rest of the game and is a major turning point, introducing the awakened personas for your party members, starting with Akihiko, mourning a man that was like a brother to him. Reload rubs even more salt into the wound as you get to spend more time with him and even clean out his room with Mitsuru after he dies, and oh, it hurts so good. And then you get to see Chidori die as well, not only someone who had much more to live for, but also someone whose death is much more unfair given how her life was screwed up by the Kiriju group. And Mitsuru's dad also dies. And Ryoji giving you his life on a platter, willing to sacrifice himself to prevent you from suffering. And a video of Yukari's dad. And so many relatives in the social links. So as you close your eyes in the final cutscene, you don't need to see what happens next. You know. Being able to save Chidori if you do Junpei's side stories is a bit in conflict with that theme, but it doesn't take away from the gravitas of the scene and just serves as a moment of triumph for a few months later, so I think it's good. They deserve it. The real tragedy is the fact that visiting her in the hospital takes one day away from your time in January, and because of it, in my playthrough, Fuka didn't score. Leave condolences for the poor girl in the comments. And man, I'm so glad nothing was changed about this ending. It just never fails to make me tear up despite being a cynical old man. Nyx's avatar is a perfect final boss, recounting the entire journey up until this point in metaphors, while a rock version of the theme you have been hearing all game in the Velvet Room is blasting. The team, including the disembodied voice of Shinji, and all the social links that you, personally, chose to max out, thinking about you in that final moment when all seems lost. The fact that the final attack to seal Nyx is marked as costing your full HP, the victory lap of getting one last message from every S-link you maxed, the subtle nudges to just how tired the protagonist is, and finally being able to rest after fulfilling the promise made to everyone to remember what happened and meet them again one last time. Absolutely perfect ending thematically, no notes. Though, I guess the opening song no longer being Burn My Dread kinda takes away how special it feels when facing Nyx. It is interesting how this also works in tandem with the theme of connections being hard and how the S-links work. Because, sure, you can interpret this as emo Jesus dying for our sin of nihilism, and that is easily supported by the highest level persona you unlock in the progression of the main plot being literally the idea of a messiah. And that is a fair reading, a meaning given to something as grand and scary as death itself, but I also think there are a few more layers to this, because remember, we have a sacrifice to make it all better in the form of Ryoji, and that leads you to the bad ending. Not to mention our protag didn't just drop in that final fight, only once he knew the rest of Z's remembered that promise and rushed to meet him. Let's take a look at our dude Minato Arisato for a second. He is, let's say, Yu Ishigami coded. Blue hair, bangs over eyes, slouched, always accompanied by a music player and headphones, and Reload adds the lovely detail of him being constantly depicted as floating aimlessly and alone in water whenever you open the menu. He starts off as a timid, uncharismatic slacker, and despite being 16 already, there is not even a single hint of a past life. No friends from an old school, no relatives, nothing. So nothing that the arcana representing him is the full, 0. Like, switching personas was something everyone could do before, and while I'm sure applying AI to party member behavior played a role in changing that as well, this was a very deliberate stylistic choice. And he is completely unfazed by the dark hour, only thinking about how he should get to the dorm as he's running late. So he's either completely used to this due to having Pharaoh sealed in him, even if they never spoke prior to the events of the game, or just so fucking depressed that he can't even muster enough feelings to be surprised at seeing downright apocalyptic imagery. The protag may not be a blank slate, but boy oh boy is he an audience surrogate for the kind of person that devs really wanted to reach with this story spanning 70 plus hours. And you know what? Given that I was never particularly social myself, it certainly did speak to me. Not that I'm willingly throwing myself into parties, but I certainly did internalize that nothing will happen if I myself never do anything. This also makes me think that the choice of how the party members are written is very deliberate. Junpei is the kind of guy to approach a newcomer and offer friendship, just because it must be tough for someone in a completely new environment, and he grows worried of what good is his life without the powers, which can also be a worry shared by you if your thoughts playing the game are, wow, I wish I had superpowers so I could socialize with cool people. Yukari is quick to jump the gun when feeling that her personal agency is threatened, but also quick to apologize, so even if you feel like you made bad choices when trying to connect with her, it's still okay if you don't stop communicating. Akihiko is an orphan himself and also quite antisocial, but he also has goals he's striving for and people close to him like family. Mitsuru is the kind of high-status, perfect person that would normally feel unapproachable, but shows her human side to her team members. Fuka is incredibly timid and constantly thinking about how she needs to contribute and what others are thinking, so you can see how that sort of self-isolation looks from the outside. Ken is self-destructively obsessed with revenge and desperately making up appearances of a mature child to not have to connect with anyone. Shinjiro feels like his life is at its end and puts a tough persona, to keep people away due to feelings of guilt, which only makes it more tragic when you understand what a soft-hearted dork he truly is. Aigis is literally a robot and she still feels like a real person, even before she realizes she has feelings for real, and serves as a mirror to show how even if you feel like you're empty inside, people want to connect with you. And Koromaru is fucking adorable. But probably more important is how these social links work narratively. On one hand, it's easy and pretty fair to criticize how the dialogue system rewards you for playing a sociopath that fits their behavior to please whoever you're speaking with. Again, I feel like it was designed to make you choose who you want to spend your time with rather than game it, but I think there is one very important narrative aspect that gets omitted when people get frustrated when, say, they want to tell Kenji that trying to woo a teacher is a terrible idea, and it only makes you have to spend more time with him to max the link out. And that is, you don't help anyone in these sub-stories, not directly at least. They find the solution they need themselves, sometimes through pain, sometimes through self-reflection, sometimes through hard work, but always thanks to the bond you form, the feeling of support and being understood. Self-betterment is a journey that everyone needs to take on their own, including yourself, you lazy cowardly slob, but knowing that someone has your back makes it easier to take those scary steps. And the final moments before facing Nyx is a mirror of that. All your friends save you and push you forward, so you can literally save them in turn. Not to say that you should become the therapist for everyone you meet at age 16, which is the unflattering read you can make on the whole thing, but that's the limitations of the medium for you. A game is only 70 hours, your real life is so much more. This in turn is followed by Strega and the cult they lead in the final act, literally praying for someone else, namely Nyx, to come and solve their problems for them. They do not ask for support and connection, they pray for this shit to end. And man, I just love how Takaya was expanded on in Reload. In the base game, he was a bit of a nothing villain that folded like a fucking chair in combat, but here he really feels like a foil to the protagonist, trying to keep all connections away and using his powers for personal gain, arguing there is no point in trying to make the world better, while later embracing oblivion to finally equalize himself with the world that hurt him and filed his lifespan down to the point where any idea of having a future seemed absurd. And he still fucking fails, because him and Jin are clearly attached to each other, and opening up about the ills inflicted on them by the Kirijo group potentially paves way for Mitsuru to clean house. Incredible. I also quite like how the main team has to confront their fear of death with the evokers, whereas Strega has fully rejected said fear and their personas are literally killing them over time because of it. Though I guess judging by Chidori's behavior after she falls for Junpei, it's more like ignoring it rather than rejecting it. Literally do it scared by putting a toy gun to your head and forcing yourself to deal with the problem at hand now rather than ignore it, which in turn leads to a fuller life. If there's one thing I would still have to criticize, it's Itsuki being a bit of a nothing villain. While I get that he is carrying the torch for how Mitsuru's granddad fucked everything up to keep her and her dad likable as people who are trying to clean the situation up, I generally can't parse what bro was thinking. We're 3/4 into the plot and the dude just pulls a prophecy out of his ass to justify thinking he can be Nyx's herald, while also foreshadowing Ryoji showing up and giving Agis a crisis of faith by controlling her like a puppet. Like, I get what this is going for from a writer trying to push the plot forward perspective, I just think it's kinda forced and a weak link in the plot as a whole. Well, since I'm already complaining, let's get back to the rest. I'm glad to see you all gathered here to hear me whinge about trivial shit. First and foremost, I think we need to throw people responsible for the pricing of this game into the wood chipper. $70 and a bunch of paid DLC, like come on. I got a CD key for a more reasonable price, but it still was like 5% of my monthly salary. They even made the answer, an epilogue campaign, a separate thing to be downloaded once it comes out in September. And I don't even care for the answer that much. Despite me praising the writing and theming in this game to high heavens, I have to say it is juvenile at moments. A lot of the tapes you can access in the command room are funny as hell, but some are just voyeuristic. And I'm sure a pre-rendered cutscene was not needed for the protagonist awakening the persona for the first time, but it was needed for the shot of girls in swimsuits. Maybe it's the fact I grew old and these characters did not, but man, I can tell when you're trying to sell me a fantasy and it's not working, because my fantasies now all involve an office building spontaneously combusting. The music remixes don't hit quite as hard sometimes, and it's a shame. It's not even a problem in the game. In general, I think it's mixed incredibly well and fits the scene and combat, but if I want to listen to the OST outside of the game, I'll probably dig for the original P3 tracks more often. I don't even know what it is, it may just be nostalgia speaking, but some oomph just seems missing sometimes. I think the visual design of the shadows is just kinda weak, especially considering the Tartarus mini-bosses are just palette swaps. I get that they were trying something new compared to the old Shin Megami Tensei demons, but I just ain't that interested in fighting scales and tables. The full moon boss fights are solid designs, but there is some detachment between the mechanical feeling of progress and how the visuals of the enemies repeat regardless of level, because there's a few visual types with a bunch of variations and I just never really like that. And on the topic of visual design, man, I miss the downright flippant way that the protagonist summoned a persona in the original game. It flows better now, but at what cost? And regarding the changes they could have made, just have EXP share for the non-active party members. I actually used the whole team in P5 because I never had to worry about catching them up to speed, and Reload gives us a weird half measure of something being able to level up to party members to where you're at. Just let me use anyone without worry, make it a toggle if you're concerned about alienating people who love doing Tartarus runs for vibes. The linked episodes, aka non-social link stories, can be a bit awkward in how they're timed, because they're missable, but nothing aside from a phone message usually tells you one is available. You kinda need to make a habit out of checking it every time to make sure you don't miss them, even if what you get there is 90% spam from companies. This is the kind of realism I can do without. Missing one the first time it shows up is not the end of the world, but keep your eyes peeled. In summary, this is one of the best games of all time still, and Reload is a perfect way to experience it without compromising anything. Go grab it on a sale, or otherwise, and join me after you beat it. Because baby, oh, you better believe I'm adding this game to the catalog of things I shield relentlessly now that it's out on PC. I hope my usual line of offense will work, but if not, well, let's just say I awakened to new possibilities. Hey, thanks for sticking with the video to the end. The short animation about the history of Persona was done by Frog King, so all praise goes to them if you liked it. And as usual, huge thanks to all my Patreon supporters, now visible on the screen, for bankrolling these videos. Especially helpful now that I am technically unemployed. If you like what I do, we're roughly 1 bajillion supporters away from letting me do this full time, so consider joining their illustrious ranks. Next video, we're either gonna lament over having to read books, or get stranded on a beach as a single dad. Really depends on what I finish first. See you then.